The frost-covered windshield of Detective Ray Kowalski's patrol car caught the pale morning light as he pulled into the empty parking lot behind Murphy's camera shop on State Street. October 15th, 1992, Madison, Wisconsin. The kind of crisp autumn morning that made the university town feel like a postcard, all golden maples and brick buildings shrouded in mist rolling off Lake Mendota. But there was nothing picturesque about the call that had brought him here at 7:30 in the morning. Marcus Webb had been missing for 3 days. Jennifer Holbrook stood beside the shop's back entrance, clutching a steaming cup of coffee from the gas station across the street. Her long brown hair hung loose around her shoulders, and dark circles beneath her eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent waiting by the phone. She was 26, a graduate student in social work at UW-Madison, and she'd been dating Marcus for almost 2 years. Long enough to know his routines, his habits, his reliable nature that made his disappearance so completely out of character. "He was supposed to meet me at the Memorial Union Tuesday night," Jennifer said, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "We had tickets for the foreign film series, that Italian movie about the postman." "Marcus never misses things like that. He plans everything out, Detective. He keeps lists. Before we dive deeper into this mystery, we'd love to have you join our community. Please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this one." Now, let's return to that cold October morning in Madison. Detective Kowalski had been working missing persons cases for 6 years, ever since transferring from patrol duty in 1986. He'd learned to read the subtle signs that separated genuine disappearances from people who simply chose to start over somewhere else. Missing toothbrush and clothes suggested a planned departure. Missing wallet but untouched bank account suggested foul play. Marcus Webb's case fell uncomfortably into the latter category. The photographer's one-bedroom apartment above Antonelli's Italian Market on Williamson Street painted a picture of interrupted routine. A half-eaten bowl of Lucky Charms sat on the small kitchen table, the milk long since soured. Bills were laid out for payment, electric, phone, rent, with a checkbook open beside them. The October page of a wall calendar showed appointments penciled in neat handwriting through the end of the month. Henderson family portraits, 4 p.m. picnic point on October 13th. Johnson wedding proofs ready on October 16th. Mom's birthday dinner Milwaukee on October 24th. Marcus Webb was 28 years old, originally from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. He'd moved to Madison 3 years earlier after graduating from the Art Institute of Chicago, drawn by the university town's creative community and the steady demand for family portraits, wedding photography, and local event coverage. His work was good, not gallery-quality fine art, but honest, warm images that captured genuine moments in people's lives. He specialized in natural light photography, preferring outdoor settings to studio work, and had built a solid reputation among Madison's young families and university community. "Tell me about Tuesday," Kowalski said, settling into Marcus's second-hand couch while Jennifer perched nervously on a folding chair near the window. "He had the Henderson session scheduled for 4 o'clock, she said, consulting a small address book. "Then he was going to drop the film at Murphy's for processing before meeting me at 7. Marcus is always early for everything. He would have been at the Union by 6:45, checking to make sure he had the right theater." The Henderson family confirmed the appointment. Robert Henderson, 34, worked as an engineer for the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. His wife Linda was a part-time nurse at University Hospital. Their 8-year-old twin daughters, Emma and Grace, had been excited about their first professional photo session, Linda told Kowalski over the phone. "Marcus was wonderful with the girls," Linda Henderson said. "They can be shy with strangers, but he had them laughing and playing naturally within minutes. He took his time, waited for the right light, explained what he was doing, very professional, very patient. We were supposed to see proofs on Friday." The session had taken place at Picnic Point, a wooded peninsula that jutted into Lake Mendota on the university campus. It was Marcus's favorite location for autumn portraits, a mix of oak and maple trees that provided natural frames and dappled lighting. The Hendersons remembered him shooting 6 or 7 rolls of film over the course of 90 minutes, working methodically as the late afternoon sun slanted through the golden leaves. He packed up his equipment around 5:30, Robert Henderson recalled. Said he wanted to catch the last good light for some landscape shots before heading back to town. The girls were getting tired anyway. It had been a long session. That was the last confirmed sighting of Marcus Webb, loading camera equipment into his burgundy 1987 Toyota Corolla in the Picnic Point parking lot as shadows lengthened across Lake Mendota. A jogger remembered seeing him because she'd admired his professional camera bag and thought about asking him for business card information, but decided not to interrupt his packing process. Detective Kowalski spent the following days reconstructing Marcus's life and relationships, looking for any detail that might explain his disappearance. He interviewed fellow photographers, regular clients, and the loose community of artists and graduate students who gathered at places like Mother Fool's Coffee House and the Crystal Corner Bar. Everyone described Marcus as dependable, talented, and genuinely passionate about his work. He didn't drink heavily, didn't use drugs, didn't gamble or chase women. His only vice seemed to be an expensive taste in camera equipment that he couldn't quite afford on a freelance photographer's income. The financial investigation revealed a man living carefully within modest means. Marcus's checking account contained $843. His savings account held another $1,200. Money he'd been setting aside to upgrade from his current Nikon FM2 to a more advanced autofocus system. His credit cards showed normal purchases: gas, groceries, film, and processing supplies from Murphy's camera shop. Occasional dinners out with Jennifer. No large cash withdrawals, no unusual expenses, no signs of financial distress that might motivate a voluntary disappearance. Marcus's family drove down from Eau Claire on Thursday morning. His parents, Donald and Patricia Webb, were both high school teachers. He taught history, she taught English literature. They were quiet, practical people who'd supported their son's artistic ambitions while worrying privately about his ability to make a living with a camera. Donald Webb was a veteran of the Vietnam War who'd seen enough of the world's darkness to fear the worst about his son's disappearance. "Marcus calls us every Sunday evening," Patricia Webb told Detective Kowalski, her hands twisted together in her lap. "Every single Sunday, at 7 o'clock after dinner, but before the news. He called last Sunday, told us about a wedding he'd photographed in Spring Green, said the bride cried when she saw the proofs. He was happy, Detective. He loved his work, loved Madison, loved Jennifer. This isn't like him." The Corolla never surfaced, despite statewide alerts to police departments and auto impound lots. Marcus's camera equipment was valuable. His primary body was a Nikon FM2 worth about $600, and he typically carried 2 or 3 lenses worth several $100s each. The kind of gear that would be noticed if someone tried to sell it at local pawn shops or camera stores. But no one reported seeing Marcus's distinctive donkey canvas camera bag or his equipment. As October turned to November, then December, the case settled into the frustrating rhythm of a cold investigation. Detective Kowalski followed up on reported sightings. A photographer matching Marcus's description spotted in the Wisconsin Dells, another in La Crosse, a third in Minneapolis. None proved to be Marcus Webb. He investigated tips from psychics and amateur detectives, traced rumors and half-remembered conversations, pursued leads that led nowhere and theories that crumbled under scrutiny. The photography community rallied around the mystery, organizing search parties that combed the woods around Picnic Point and the rural areas south of Madison, where Marcus sometimes went to photograph barns and farmland. The University of Wisconsin student newspaper ran feature stories about the missing photographer who'd captured senior portraits and graduation ceremonies for hundreds of students. Local television stations aired segments showing Marcus's work and pleading for information about his whereabouts. Jennifer Holbrook became the public face of the search effort, organizing volunteer efforts and maintaining contact with media outlets. She appeared on regional television programs, distributed flyers at shopping malls and grocery stores, and kept a vigil that gradually consumed her graduate studies and emotional well-being. As winter deepened and hope faded, friends began encouraging her to consider the possibility that Marcus might not be coming home. "Everyone keeps telling me I need to move on," Jennifer told Detective Kowalski during one of their regular check-ins. "They say I'm young. I'll meet someone else. I shouldn't waste my life waiting for someone who might be dead. But what if he's not dead? What if he's hurt somewhere or being held against his will, and I'm the only person still looking for him?" The case officially remained active, but resources were limited and new investigations demanded attention. Detective Kowalski kept Marcus's file on his desk rather than filing it away, reviewing witness statements and evidence logs whenever he had spare time. He'd developed a working theory that Marcus had witnessed something criminal during or after the Henderson photo session, something significant enough to warrant his disappearance or death. But theories weren't evidence, and evidence was exactly what the case lacked. As 1992 became 1993, then 1994, the Marcus Webb investigation became part of Madison's collective memory, referenced in newspaper retrospectives and true crime discussions. The Henderson family kept their appointment with Marcus's replacement photographer, but the images never seemed quite right. Technically competent, but lacking the warmth and natural feeling that Marcus had captured in his work. Emma and Grace Henderson grew up knowing they'd been among the last people to see the missing photographer, a fact that would influence their later interest in journalism and documentary work. Jennifer Holbrook finally left Madison in the spring of 1995, accepting a social work position in Denver, where she wouldn't be constantly reminded of the life she'd planned with Marcus. She took with her a box of his photographs, not the professional work, but personal shots he'd taken of her, of them together, of quiet moments in their shared life that now seemed impossibly distant. The apartment above Antonelli's was rented to a graduate student who knew nothing of its previous tenant's mysterious fate. Detective Kowalski was promoted to sergeant in 1996, then lieutenant in 2001, but he never stopped thinking about Marcus Webb. The case had become personal in a way that surprised him, perhaps because Marcus had been close to his own age, or because the mystery seemed so completely inexplicable. A person couldn't simply vanish in broad daylight in a town the size of Madison. Not without leaving some trace of their passage. The years accumulated like sediment in a riverbed. Madison grew and changed, welcoming new residents who'd never heard of Marcus Webb. The downtown area was revitalized with new restaurants and shops. The university expanded, bringing more students and more demand for the kind of photography services Marcus had provided. Digital cameras began replacing film, making Marcus's darkroom equipment and developing processes seem quaint and outdated. Technology advanced in ways that might have helped solve the case if it had occurred a decade later. Cell phones became common, providing digital breadcrumbs that could track a person's movements. Security cameras proliferated, creating surveillance networks that might have captured crucial evidence. DNA analysis became a standard investigative tool, but Marcus Webb remained trapped in 1992, a mystery from the analog age that resisted digital solutions. Patricia Webb died of cancer in 2003, never learning what had happened to her son. Donald Webb survived her by 5 years, spending his retirement researching missing persons cases and corresponding with other families who'd lost loved ones without explanation. He maintained a detailed file of every tip, every possible sighting, every theory about Marcus's disappearance. When he died in 2008, the file was donated to the Madison Police Department, adding to the already substantial collection of documents related to the case. By 2010, Lieutenant Kowalski had become Captain Kowalski, overseeing the detective division of a police department that bore little resemblance to the one he'd joined in the 1980s. Computer databases had replaced filing cabinets, forensic science had advanced dramatically, and social media provided new tools for both investigation and misinformation. But Marcus Webb remained an unsolved puzzle, his case file now thick with reports and theories, but no closer to resolution. The breakthrough came on a sweltering July afternoon in 2011, almost 19 years after Marcus vanished into the Wisconsin autumn. A construction crew was renovating a Victorian house on East Dayton Street, converting the century-old structure into upscale condominiums. The house had changed hands multiple times over the decades, its ownership history lost in the bureaucratic maze of property transfers and estate sales that characterized Madison's volatile real estate market. Tommy Kowalski, no relation to the detective despite the shared surname, was the crew foreman overseeing the renovation. His workers were installing new electrical systems in the basement when they discovered something unexpected wedged behind the old furnace, wrapped in plastic and covered with decades of dust and debris. It was a manila envelope, sealed with electrical tape and containing 6 rolls of undeveloped 35mm film. Attached to the envelope was a handwritten note on lined notebook paper. "If something happens to me, develop these rolls. The truth is in the pictures. October 13th, 1992, M.W." Tommy Kowalski had lived in Madison his entire life. He'd been 19 years old when Marcus Webb disappeared, and he remembered the case from newspaper coverage and local television reports. The initials and date left no doubt about the envelope's significance. Without disturbing the contents further, he called the Madison Police Department. Captain Kowalski felt his pulse quicken when the call came through dispatch. He'd spent nearly 2 decades wondering what had happened to Marcus Webb, following false leads and pursuing theories that led nowhere. The possibility that Marcus himself had left behind evidence was both thrilling and terrifying. It suggested answers, but also confirmed that something terrible had indeed happened to the missing photographer. The film was transported to a specialized laboratory in Milwaukee, where technicians experienced in historical preservation could develop the decades-old negatives without damaging whatever images they might contain. The process required 3 days of careful work, each roll demanding painstaking attention to coax images from celluloid that had waited 19 years to reveal its secrets. The first 3 rolls contained exactly what investigators expected: the Henderson family portrait session at Picnic Point. Emma and Grace Henderson, 8 years old and missing their front teeth, laughed and played among the golden autumn leaves while their parents watched with patient affection. Marcus had captured beautiful images, full of natural warmth and the kind of genuine emotion that had made him popular among Madison families. The photographs were technically excellent and emotionally resonant, the work of a skilled professional who understood that the best portraits revealed character rather than simply recording appearance. But rolls 4, 5, and 6 told a completely different story. The images were grainy and distant, clearly shot with a telephoto lens from a concealed position. They showed 2 men beside a dark sedan parked on what appeared to be a remote dirt road surrounded by dense woods. One man was older, perhaps in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit that seemed incongruous in the rural setting. The other was younger, maybe 35, dressed in jeans and a hunting jacket that suggested familiarity with outdoor work. Between them, partially visible in several frames, was a large object wrapped in what appeared to be canvas or heavy plastic sheeting. The men were loading this bundle into the sedan's trunk with obvious effort, their body language suggesting both urgency and extreme caution. Their faces, when visible, showed tension and what might have been fear. The final photograph on roll 6 was the most significant, a clear shot of the sedan's rear license plate, captured as the vehicle prepared to leave the secluded location. The Wisconsin plate number was clearly visible, 847 JRL. Captain Kowalski felt 19 years of frustration and speculation suddenly crystallize into understanding. Marcus Webb hadn't simply disappeared. He'd stumbled upon something criminal, documented it with his photographer's instincts, and then hidden the evidence before vanishing himself. The question that remained was whether he'd fled in fear or been silenced by the men in the photographs. The license plate led investigators to a 1989 Lincoln Town car registered to Vincent Torino, a Chicago businessman with extensive FBI files documenting his suspected involvement in organized crime activities throughout the Midwest. In 1992, Torino had been under federal investigation for money laundering operations disguised as legitimate real estate development projects. He'd never been successfully prosecuted, but law enforcement agencies had maintained surveillance on his activities for years. The younger man in the photographs proved more difficult to identify initially. Facial recognition technology, unavailable in 1992 but now standard in criminal investigations, eventually matched him to Frank Kohler, a construction contractor from Rockford, Illinois. Corolla had no criminal record, but business filings showed extensive contracting work for companies later determined to be fronts for Torino's illegal operations. Both men were still alive in 2011, though aged and living quietly in what appeared to be comfortable retirement. Torino resided in a gated community outside Phoenix, Arizona, while Kohler had moved to a fishing cabin near Duluth, Minnesota. Neither had ever been questioned about Marcus Webb's disappearance during the original investigation. There had been no reason to connect a Chicago crime figure and an Illinois contractor to a missing photographer from Madison. The wrapped bundle, visible in Marcus's photographs, remained a mystery that would require careful detective work to solve. Cold case investigators began examining missing persons reports from late 1992, looking for anyone who might have vanished around the same time as Marcus. They also reviewed unsolved homicides and suspicious deaths, searching for patterns that might connect to the evidence Marcus had captured. The connection came from an unexpected source, a retired FBI agent named David Chen, who'd worked organized crime cases in Chicago during the early 1990s. When shown Marcus's photographs, he immediately recognized both Torino and Corolla from surveillance operations he'd conducted decades earlier. We knew Torino was involved in money laundering, but we could never prove it in court, Chen explained to investigators. The operation was sophisticated. They'd buy rural properties through shell companies, claim to be developing them as resorts or recreational facilities, then abandon the projects after moving money through the construction contracts. We suspected they were also using the remote locations for other purposes, but we never had evidence. Chen's files contained references to a Chicago family that had disappeared in September 1992, Antonio Benedetto, his wife Rosa, and their teenage son Michael. Antonio had worked as a bookkeeper for several businesses, later determined to be fronts for money laundering operations. FBI agents had theorized that he'd discovered irregularities in the financial records and either fled with his family or been eliminated to prevent his testimony. The Benedetto case went cold fast, Chen recalled. The family just vanished one weekend, left everything behind, didn't pack clothes or take savings accounts. We assumed they'd been relocated by organized crime figures who wanted to silence Antonio permanently. Looking at these photographs, I think we were half right. The remote location where Marcus had photographed Torino and Kohler was identified through careful analysis of background details visible in the images. The dirt road, the configuration of trees, and glimpses of distant landmarks helped investigators pinpoint a section of rural Dane County, about 20 miles southwest of Madison. Property records revealed that the land had been owned by one of Torino's shell companies in 1992, purchased as part of a failed resort development project. Ground-penetrating radar scans of the area in late 2011 revealed several anomalies beneath the earth near where Marcus had taken his photographs. When forensic archaeologists carefully excavated the sites, they discovered the remains of 3 individuals buried in shallow graves, their bodies wrapped in the same type of canvas material visible in Marcus's images. The victims were identified through dental records and DNA analysis as the missing Benedetto family. All 3 had been dead for approximately 19 years, killed by gunshot wounds to the head, before being transported to this remote burial site. The evidence suggested a professional execution, quick, efficient, designed to eliminate witnesses to criminal activity. Marcus Webb had been in the wrong place at the worst possible time. After completing the Henderson family photo session, he'd apparently driven south from Picnic Point, perhaps hoping to capture some autumn landscape images in the golden hour light that photographers prize. Instead, he'd witnessed the disposal of evidence from a triple homicide. The question of what had happened to Marcus himself was answered through painstaking detective work and a stroke of investigative luck. Frank Corolla, now 74 years old and facing federal charges related to the newly discovered evidence, decided to cooperate with investigators in hopes of negotiating a reduced sentence. According to Corolla's detailed confession, he and Torino had been in the process of burying the Benedetto family's remains when they noticed a camera flash in the distance, Marcus capturing their criminal activity with his telephoto lens. They'd seen him driving away in his burgundy Toyota and had followed him back toward Madison, eventually forcing him off County Road M near the village of Cross Plains. Marcus, terrified but thinking quickly, had told them he was just a nature photographer who hadn't seen anything significant. He'd offered to give them his camera and film, insisting he only wanted to go home safely to his girlfriend. But Torino and Corolla couldn't afford to take chances with a potential witness to murder. They'd forced Marcus to drive to the Victorian house on East Dayton Street, a property Torino owned through another shell company and used for various illegal activities. While Corolla held Marcus at gunpoint in the basement, Torino had searched the Toyota Corolla thoroughly, finding and destroying the camera equipment and film he could locate. But Marcus had been more resourceful than his captors realized. Before being forced from his vehicle, he'd somehow managed to conceal 6 rolls of film, the most incriminating evidence, in his jacket. When Torino and Corolla began arguing about how to handle their unexpected problem, Marcus had slipped the film and his hastily written note behind the furnace, hoping someone would eventually discover his final message. The photographer kept insisting he was just taking pictures of trees, Corolla told investigators. Said he hadn't seen us, didn't know what we were doing, just wanted to go home. But Torino didn't believe him. Said we couldn't take the risk, not with everything at stake. He was probably right. The guy had seen too much. Marcus Webb never left the Victorian house alive. According to Corolla's confession, Torino had decided that a missing photographer posed less risk than a living witness who might eventually remember crucial details or be persuaded to testify. Marcus was killed with a single gunshot to the head in the house's basement, his body later transported to a remote quarry in Iowa, where it was weighted down and sunk in water deep enough to prevent discovery. The Toyota Corolla had been driven to Chicago and destroyed in a scrapyard owned by another Torino associate. Any remaining evidence of Marcus's final day was systematically eliminated, except for the 6 rolls of film that had waited 19 years in their hiding place to speak for the dead. Captain Kowalski felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and profound sadness as the investigation reached its conclusion. The mystery that had haunted him for nearly 2 decades was finally solved, but the resolution brought no relief or redemption. Marcus Webb had died because he'd been a conscientious photographer who'd instinctively documented something extraordinary and extraordinarily dangerous. His artistic eye and professional instincts had cost him his life. The news of the case's resolution made national headlines, a story of crime and justice, delayed but not denied. Jennifer Martinez, formerly Jennifer Holbrook, learned of the developments while living in Portland, Oregon, where she'd built a successful career as a family therapist and raised 2 children with her husband of 12 years. The phone call from Madison police brought back memories she'd spent 2 decades trying to process. "I always knew something terrible had happened to him," she told reporters. "Marcus wasn't the kind of person who would just disappear without explanation. He was responsible, caring, committed to his work and to the people he loved. Learning that he died trying to document a crime that somehow seems consistent with who he was. He always said photographers had a responsibility to bear witness to important events." The Henderson family, whose portrait session had been Marcus's final professional assignment, struggled to reconcile their memories of that peaceful autumn afternoon with the violent events that had followed. Emma and Grace Henderson, now 37 years old with families of their own, decided to establish a scholarship fund in Marcus's memory for photography students at the University of Wisconsin. "Marcus gave us beautiful photographs that day," Emma Henderson said at a memorial service held in Madison's Forest Hill Cemetery. "He was patient and kind, and he made us feel comfortable in front of the camera. We had no idea that taking our family portraits would lead to his death. The least we can do is help other young photographers pursue their dreams safely." Vincent Torino and Frank Kohler were convicted on multiple federal charges including murder, racketeering, and conspiracy. Torino, now 81 years old, received a life sentence without possibility of parole. Kohler, in exchange for his cooperation and detailed confession, received a 25-year sentence that would likely keep him imprisoned for the remainder of his natural life. The Victorian house where Marcus had hidden his final photographs was eventually converted to condominiums, as originally planned. A small memorial plaque near the front entrance honors his memory and acknowledges his role in bringing justice to multiple victims of organized crime. The basement where he'd made his last desperate act of defiance became a storage area for residents' bicycles and seasonal decorations. Captain Kowalski retired 6 months after the case was closed, his 30-year career defined by the persistence that had finally solved Madison's most enduring mystery. He kept several items on his desk during his final months. One of Marcus's photographs from the Henderson family session, showing 8-year-old Emma and Grace laughing among the autumn leaves, and copies of the evidence photos that had waited 19 years to reveal their secrets. Marcus Webb's story became part of Madison's cultural memory, discussed in journalism classes and photography workshops as an example of the unexpected dangers that could arise from documenting the world honestly. His case was featured in true crime documentaries and law enforcement training seminars, always emphasizing the courage required to bear witness to difficult truths. The autumn leaves continued to fall each October around Lake Mendota, golden and beautiful in the slanted light that Marcus had loved to capture. But now they fell over a community that understood more fully the price sometimes paid for being in the wrong place at the right time, for having the instincts of a documenter when violence intersected with ordinary life. Marcus's cameras and equipment, preserved by his parents for nearly 2 decades, were donated to the University of Wisconsin journalism program, where they trained students who learned not only about technical skills, but about the responsibility that came with pointing a lens at the world. His legacy lived on in every young photographer who understood that their work was more than art or commerce. It was a form of witness, a way of ensuring that truth, no matter how deeply buried or how long delayed, would eventually find its way to the surface. The 6 rolls of film that had solved a 19-year-old mystery were preserved in the Wisconsin State Historical Society archives, along with Marcus's note and other evidence from the case. Researchers and journalists occasionally requested access to study the materials, always struck by the courage and quick thinking that had led a terrified young man to hide evidence that would eventually bring justice to multiple victims. In the end, Marcus Webb had achieved something that few photographers ever accomplish. His images had changed the world, revealing truth that powerful people had tried to keep hidden. The price had been his life, but the impact lasted far beyond his death, ensuring that the Benedetto family's murders were solved and their killers brought to justice, that other potential victims were spared, and that the practice of bearing witness to difficult realities was honored and remembered.